righty. Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Vega, and this is our weekly uh, Edgar Poe reading slash Vega for Congress weekly live stream where we come in and we update you on what's going on with the campaign. And as always, we are also led by our friend Dennis Speed in a reading of something by Edgar Poe. I'm just looking over to my left, making sure that we're good on audio. Okay, good. We're good on audio. Very good. I apologize if people see me really blurry for some reason. I'm not sure why that's the case, but hopefully people can hear me okay. First of all, yesterday was the actual birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. It's a holiday that will be celebrated on the 19th. And one of the things that I was sort of reflecting on was the speech or the sermon that he gave called "A Knock at Midnight." And I really resonate with this because if you are somebody right now who is feeling that existential dread in the country, if you are feeling something where you know that something is wrong, you know that the way in which things are going, the course of events cannot continue this way, what that is, it's your conscience. It's your conscience knocking at you saying that now is the time to act and actually do something. Now is the time to reclaim your independence. And what better year than this year, the 250th anniversary of the founding of the country? And you might be somebody who's thinking to yourself, well, what is there to celebrate? What is there that is worth being proud of? Well, that's part of the reason why we've been doing these Edgar Poe readings. A lot of people don't know that Edgar Poe was actually part of a grander conspiracy of people to keep the mission of the founding fathers alive. And the way he did that was because he became a founding father, as did Martin Luther King Jr. These people are founding fathers of this country, something that Dennis Speed will elaborate on further. This week, we saw two important meetings. One was the International Peace Coalition call that happened earlier today, which was a roundtable and more of an update on what happened earlier this week on Monday, where there was an emergency meeting hosted by EIR, Executive Intelligence Review. What happened there was we had all kinds of experts, from Chaz Freeman to Naledi Pandor. These are people that have been around official diplomatic circles for decades, who have been foreign ministers to various countries. And one of the important things that Chaz Freeman said towards the end of the call was that America and conditions around the world are entering that of a pre-revolutionary phase, meaning that what we are seeing now, what we could be seeing now, is the brink of an actual breakthrough where people demand that they want to be free and not ruled by tyrants. And by doing that, they declare their freedom and independence in their minds. That is what we exist to foster and do here as a part of what we're doing with the Vega for Congress campaign. And anybody who is not talking to you at that level, from that fundamental level, that this year of all years is one of the most important years, not for elections, but for you as an American and your identity, for that feeling of dread and existential dread that you're feeling right now, something can be done about it. And there was a document that was written 250 years ago called the Declaration of Independence. And it begins when in the course of human events, people must dissolve the political bands that unite one another. And in reading this document with people often ask me, what exactly does that mean? And we actually begin to discuss it. And we begin to discuss other elements. For example, in the document, it says that all people are created equal. Well, sometimes you get different reactions from different people. Some people say, yeah, but they didn't consider everyone to be people. Well, you know what? The truth is that document is yours. Whether you think it was written for you or not, it is yours. And I'm not just talking about people who were born on this soil. I'm talking about people around the world. Anybody can read that document and resonate with it. Many revolutions happened after 1776 because of that document, because other people decided to internalize that document and make it theirs as well, and decided they did not want to be subjects anymore, and they wanted to be citizens. And so what happened today on the International Peace Coalition call was basically a citizens committee of people coming together, deciding that now is the time to move forward. We had on former elected officials from Mexico. We had on Helga Zaplarusha, as always, who gave us a good update talking about that Iran has seemed to quell its protests, and that Donald Trump, as of right now, it seems may not actually do any kind of military strike in Iran. That's a good thing. But how do we keep those conditions at that level? And how do we move forward in making sure that the United States and Iran and Russia and China can actually work together? How do we go past this sort of mentality that might makes right, that power is dictated through strength? How do we move past that? How do we get people to understand that real power is force, not strength, not violence, not having to point to your stick, not being more violent than another person or the ability to kill? I don't believe that power means that just because you can snap your fingers and a million dead Palestinian children happen the next day, that makes you powerful. I think that makes you weak. I don't believe that tyrants have power. I believe that the real power is in human creativity. It's one of the reasons why I've been affiliated with the Schiller Institute and the LaRouche organization since I was 15 years old, for that fundamental principle that real human creativity is power. Not strength, not brute force, but your mind is your most powerful tool, and ideas contribute to that. So that is my opening for today. And what I want to do now is I want to bring in our friend Dennis Speed here so he can continue to explain things further. Dennis, are you there and can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, what we'll do for various reasons, so people just know, we have a couple of different presentations tonight. And Kynan, I'm going to hope that you have gotten those posters, just a couple of references to Poe. What we're going to do is to just try to get it an idea, because this is Martin Luther King weekend, an idea of which is revolutionary and therefore rejected generally, uh, and probably best stated by another poet, Percy Shelley. Percy Shelley died at the age of 29. He was around between the about 1790 and 1820 approximately. And he wrote an essay called In Defense of Poetry. And he has a passage which I'll read to you. We could make it available perhaps later, but you'll be able to understand it. He says this: poets, according to the circumstances of the age and nation in which they appeared, were called in the earlier epochs of the world legislators or prophets. A poet essentially comprises and unites both these characters, for he not only beholds intensely the present as it is and discovers those laws according to which present things ought to be ordered, but he beholds the future in the present. So I'll read that again. Poets, according to the circumstances of the age and nation in which they appeared, were called, in the earlier epochs of the world, legislators or prophets. A poet essentially comprises and unites both these characters, for he not only beholds intensely the present as it is and discovers those laws according to which present things ought to be ordered, but he beholds the future in the present. Now, Martin Luther King was in that prophetic tradition. And there's two moments that people are familiar with in which he expressed that. There are many others in which people who were present know that he expressed that prophetic tradition. But the reason that I want to introduce that to you is because of the fact that Shelley says legislators are poets, which therefore tells you that our primary problem in Washington, D.C. today, and in London, and in Paris, and in Rome, and in Berlin, is that we have no legislators, neither Trump, nor the Congress, nor the Senate. nor most of the people in the governorships or mayoralties of this nation or any other nation are legislators, because they are not poets, nor are they prophets, nor do they purport to be. In fact, they're proud, particularly in the case of the United States, to be stupid, arrogant, ignorant, and they call that power. They call that power. It's not power, it's force. And there is a great difference between power and force. Think about the idea of the power of ideas. So we have, in the case of the several weeks that and months that we've been reading Edgar Poe, read a lot of different stories. And tonight, both for reasons of time and also because we're trying to make a different point, we're going to refer just to the story, The Purloined Letter. I think people will remember this in general who've watched, and those that have not seen this before, been on this, involves the story involved the theft of a letter. It was purloined or stolen. And it's a great search done by the French police department of the apartment of the thief. They know who has stolen the letter. This is not a case in which you have to wonder who has it. It's known very well who has it. And the person is a person of significant influence, political influence, in French society. So it becomes very important to not accuse the individual without evidence, and the evidence would have to be the letter. But the problem is, if the letter is even acknowledged to have been stolen, it will compromise someone else of very great power in the state. And the very fact that the letter would be known to have been stolen could itself create a political crisis. So the problem involved is the thief is known, the fact that he has the letter is known, but it isn't known where the letter is. And the French police have conducted this extraordinarily thorough search, but they haven't found it. And yet, there is no doubt, at least in the minds of the protagonist of the story, Dupin is his name, that the letter has to be on the premises. So it's been thoroughly searched and not seen, but that simply means that it is there, but unseen. And therefore not necessarily hidden, simply unseen. The mind can't see it, but it's right there. It's physically available and perceivable, but the mind can't see it. And the question is why that would be. And so there's a discussion in the story. And the discussion in the story occurs after the detective, Dupin, who is he's not a detective, by the way, by profession, but he has found the letter, and he has returned it to the French police, who were completely astonished that he found it and he acquired it. He doesn't say how he did this. And so there's a passage in the story, and that's what I want to refer to here. And if you might be able to bring that up on the screen, that's the one that begins, he says, "But is this really the poet I asked?" But here's what I want to sort of set it up. The thief is known to write poetry. And the prefect of police believes that poets are fools. And he has said this earlier in the story. The detective, Dupin, of the story, has remarked earlier that he himself, Dupin, writes poetry. And so there's a passage in which Dupin is discussing why he knew that the thief would get away with a crime because of his powers of poetry. And so, or rather, excuse me, that is the thief would get away with the powers of poetry, but he's not quite a full poet. And what Dupin says, we may not be able to bring it up on screen, so I'll just read it. But is this really the poet? I asked. There are two brothers, I know, and both have attained reputation in letters, in writing. The minister, I believe, has written learnedly of the differential calculus. He is a mathematician and no poet. And then Dupin responds, you are mistaken. I know him well. He is both. As poet and mathematician, he would reason well. As poet, profoundly. As mere mathematician, he could not have reasoned at all, and thus would have been at the mercy of the prefect. Now, what I'd like to do, Jose, if we can, is have you read one of those voices and have maybe Kynan read the other voice, and I'll just read where it says, I asked or I said. Okay? Can we do that?
Yeah. Yeah. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Got his version as well?
Yeah, he could just come up and
look at yours. Yeah, because it's a short passage, which goes into a little bit of French, and I have the French translation. If it's not
okay,
there.
Good.
Okay.
All right. So I pick up at you are mistaken, right?
Yeah. No. Just read. No, let's go from the part that I said. In fact, do you have the part that says, "All fools are poets"? The sentence just before.
Yeah, I do. All fools are poets. This is the prefect. Prefect feels.
And before you, and what that says, the Latin in there means the fallacy of the undistributed middle. Okay, just so when you read it, I'll just so people know what that means.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All fools are poets. This the prefect feels, and he is merely guilty of a non-distributio medi, which you said is
fallacy of the undistributed middle.
Mm-hmm. In thence inferring that all poets are fools. I keep going, right?
Well, no, this is the other voice.
Okay.
Where I can't see where you are.
Right here.
But is this really the poet?
Yep.
Yeah.
But is this really the poet?
I asked.
There are two brothers, I know, and both have attained reputation in letters. The minister, I believe, has written learnedly on the differential calculus. He is a mathematician and no poet.
You are mistaken. I know him well. He is both. As poet and mathematician, he would reason well. As poet, profoundly. As mere mathematician, he could not have reasoned at all, and thus would have been at the mercy of the prefect.
You surprise me.
I said.
By these opinions, which have been contradicted by the voice of the world. You do not mean to set at naught the well-digested idea of centuries. The mathematical reason has been long regarded as the reason par excellence.
Do you want to read that, Dennis? The French?
Yeah. Go ahead. You can read it, and I'll go through what it. Or do you want me just to say what it says?
Yeah.
I'll just say what it says. The translation is: it's a good bet that every public idea, every received convention is foolish, since it appeals to the majority.
The mathematicians, I grant you, have done their best to promulgate the popular error to which you allude, and which is nonetheless an error for its promulgation as truth. With an art worthy a better cause, for example, they have insinuated the term analysis into application to algebra. The French are the originators of this particular deception. But if a term is of any importance, if words derive any value from applicability, then analysis conveys algebra about as much as in Latin ambitus implies ambition, religio religion, or hominis honesty as a set of honorable men.
You have a quarrel at hand, I see,
said I.
with some of the algebraists of Paris, but proceed.
I dispute the availability and thus the value of that reason which is cultivated in any especial form other than the abstractly logical. I dispute in particular the reason educed by mathematical study. The mathematics are the science of form and quantity. Mathematical reasoning is merely pure logic applied to observation upon form and quantity. The great error lies in supposing that even the truths of what is called pure algebra are abstract or general truths. And this error is so egregious that I am confounded at the universality with which it has been received. Mathematical axioms are not axioms of general truth. What is true of relation, of form and quantity, is often grossly false in regards to morals. For example, in this latter science, it is very usually untrue that the aggregated parts are equal to the whole. In chemistry, also, the axiom fails. In the consideration of motive, it fails. For two motives, each of a given value, have not necessarily a value when united, equal to the sum of their values apart. There are numerous for other mathematical truths which are only truths within the limits of relation. But the mathematician argues from his finite truths through habit as if they were of an absolutely general applicability, as the world indeed imagines them to be. Bryant, in his very learned mythology, mentions an analogous source of error when he says that although the pagan fables are not believed, yet we forget ourselves continually and make inferences from them as existing realities. With the algebraists, however, who are pagans themselves, the pagan fables are believed and the inferences are made. So much through lapse of memory, through
Not so
as
much,
sorry.
not so much through lapse of memory.
Oh, excuse me. Not so much through lapse of memory as through an unaccountable addling of the brains. In short, I never yet encountered the mere mathematician who could be trusted out of equal roots, or one who did not clandestinely hold it as a point of his faith that x squared plus px was absolutely and unconditionally equal to q. Say to one of these gentlemen, by way of experiment, if you please, that you believe occasions may occur where x squared plus px is not altogether equal to q. And having made him understand what you mean, get out of his reach as speedily as convenient, for beyond doubt he will endeavor to knock you down.
It's good enough. Okay, now what this has to do with is your world today. The world in which people are talking about the notion that computers can replace human beings. The world in which people keep saying that ideas and logic are the same thing. The world in which people keep saying that mathematics is the highest science. This, my friends, is utter, thorough, unadorned bullshit. As, for example, is every conception and notion that the American economy is sound, or that money and economics are the same thing, or that people that are experts in money are experts in the idea of wealth. No such thing is true. Now, that is, of course, an assertion, but it is an assertion which is made in order to try to get back to the idea of why, for example, it is impossible for most people in the United States to conceive of the idea, or let's put it this way, to know that Martin Luther King was a founder of the United States. Because the reason that this idea would not be available to them is because of their notions of space and time. If you believe in a scalar time and a scalar space, a kind of a big empty box in which the universe is contained, a kind of a empty space, as it's called. If you believe in that fiction, then many other things are unavailable as considerations, and most of life actually is just one among one continuous succession of oddities after another. Or Newtonian physics, for example, when there's a great promoters of that, including Neil deGrasse Tyson and other people who talk about Newton as the greatest genius who ever lived. These things are all over the place. they're patently untrue, and they actually are not easily proven to be untrue, but they can be proven to be untrue. Why is this significant? Let's take King, and let's take what happened with respect to the issue of the Constitution of the United States during the period of the 1960s. Unfortunately, since this is referred to as the civil rights movement, it's caused a great confusion. What King recognized and what occurred in the case of that speech in 1963 was that there was an unfinished business that had not been finished through what people call the American Civil War, but it was really a war in 1861 to 65 between the United States and several empires, particularly the French and the English or British Empire, both of whom entered the war essentially on the side of the Confederacy. And there's something significant in a moment I'll come back to. Siding with the United States was the Russian Empire, particularly Tsar Alexander II, and implicitly China, but China was a subjugated nation which had been defeated in 2 opium wars by the British, and therefore couldn't really do much to help the United States. But what's important about pointing this out to you is that when, for example, you heard, if you were paying attention in August of the past year, that Vladimir Putin was coming to Anchorage, Alaska, to speak with President Donald Trump, you might have noticed, if you listen carefully, that there were Russians that were buried in Anchorage, and Putin went to their grave sites. And to some degree, this was referred to pilots during the Second World War and other enlisted men who were Russian, who worked together with the United States in Alaska in doing transport of materiel to Russia during what was called the Lend-Lease period. This was before the United States got into the Second World War, and it was supporting the Soviet Union by sending materiel across the Arctic Circle. And that was true, that did happen. But that's actually not the reason. The reason was that there had been Russians in that area and all the way down to California as early as the early 1800s. And of course, Alaska was sold to the United States in the year 1867. And the reason that was 2 years after the end of the war, but the reason was a set of negotiations that went on during the war. And it was intended to be a purchase that would allow the United States to work together with the Russians as a naval force to blockade the British Empire. So that was the deeper reference that was in play there in Anchorage. Now, I don't know whether Donald Trump knew that or not, but the Russians knew it. And importantly here, the reason that these things matter is because Abraham Lincoln and the Lincoln presidency had joined together with Russia. And as the Lincoln presidency also joined together with Benito Juarez of Mexico to remove the French and British installed Emperor Maximilian. There was an emperor that existed in Mexico at the time who was executed actually in Monterey. And it was the case that American veterans from the Union Army, primarily, there were some others, fought in Mexico at that time to establish the Mexican Republic, to reestablish it. Actually, there had been a coup against it. What does this have to do with King and King's speech? When he gave that speech that day, here's what King did in that speech. He began that speech by saying, 50 years ago, a great American in whose shadow we stand declared that all men are created equal. And he went on to talk about Abraham Lincoln, and it was, of course, the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, a form of an extension of the Declaration of Independence, which people talk about as having been pragmatic, etc. Well, there's something else that happened, however, with that Emancipation Proclamation, and that is that the statesman Frederick Douglass was able to successfully lead a recruitment drive that recruited approximately just under 200,000 African American males to the Union Army, accomplishing in that form what the John Brown and others failed to do at Harper's Ferry. Now, today, of course, people love to talk about the great revolutionary John Brown and what he did, et cetera, et cetera. But people don't talk about Frederick Douglass that way, who managed to actually get 200,000 people in with weapons who were on the winning side and created the winning side in terms of the decisive margin of manpower at the end of the war that entered the war. Now, the reason that people don't do it is the same reason that people talk about the American Revolution as being a white man's thing, etc., which was not true in terms of who actually fought in it, both on the side of the British and on the side of the patriot cause. That when you look at and you actually know anything about certain of these things, you know that 1 out of every 5 soldiers, for example, at the end of the war in the final battle at Yorktown were Black. Well, but it's also true that in the militia of Massachusetts in particular, at the beginning, before the war even had actually officially begun, in the 1775 period, Lexington conquered, and that period of time when the hostilities first began, that about 10% of the militia were Black. A lot of these were free Blacks, but there also were not. Or the fact that on the British side also, there were probably ultimately as many, certainly 30,000, perhaps as many as 50,000 African Americans that fought ostensibly to get their freedom from slavery on the British side. And then maybe nobody knows these exact numbers, but about 10,000 plus on the Patriot side who fought very clearly for the nation at the time. But why is this significant? Because Martin Luther King knew that. And when he was doing what he was doing, when he gave the speech that day, it was a dramatic moment. Not dramatic because it's just dramatic because people were, had goosebumps because it was exciting because there were 250,000 people out there. No, he used the Lincoln Memorial as a stage the same way a classical actor would have in Greece, because you had the statue, you had King in the shadow of the statue, you have 250,000 people out there. And then what he does is he gives this discussion in which, among other things that he had to say, he extemporizes what people know as the I Have a Dream section, which is a poem. Now, it's a poem that had been rehearsed as a sermon, and it was a sermon that was supposed to be given by John F. Kennedy. That's right, on the 1st of January, 1963. But Kennedy refused to do it because he was scared to do it. He was afraid of what it would do in the South if he did anything or called any real attention to the Emancipation Proclamation, and therefore he refused to do it. And King was placed in the position, although in fact King himself was not entirely certain he was going to deliver that in that way, but was inspired to do so by the singer Mahalia Jackson, who began to say to him as the speech, she could detect that the energy in the crowd was waning. So she yelled out, "Tell him about the dream." And then, if you know the story, King departed from the text of the speech entirely, and he just began to preach. Now, Black America, white America, let's call it, non-Black America, had never seen anything like this, although there had been some instances in which King had preached as a younger man, in Madison Square Garden. He was brought there by Billy Graham or others, and he would deliver something like that. But what then happened was not just some Black preacher's speech, it was his invocation of, as he did during the speech, things like, "My country, 'tis of thee," right? and other Let Freedom Ring. If you look at the refrains, he would refer to songs or lines from things like Handel's Messiah, or songs well known or passages well known to America. So what was happening was, as he would say a line, then in the mind of the audience, they would hear their voice in his words. And so what happened here was that he created, with this notion of a vision of a future, exactly what Shelley says here, that he not only beholds intensely the present as it is and discovers those laws according to which present things ought to be ordered, but he beholds the future in the present. Now, what happened was, this is not something he's beholding to. He had to mobilize the United States as a whole, because the president had vacillated on this. Kennedy had vacillated on this, and King had to step in to do it. He elected to do it. He was not elected to do it. He elected to do it. And the same thing happened the night before he died, in which, again, in that particular case, there's something even more profound, because there are sanitation workers who were killed. Robert Walker was the name of one of them, and the other is a name like Enoch Ellock or something. I'm not quite sure what the name of the other man was. They had been crushed to death in a compactor because they had not been allowed, because they were black, to take shelter from a storm. So they had to stay in the back of their garbage truck, and the scoop, the thing, the compactor came down and crushed them to death. And so what King did that night before he died, he came in and gave a speech, 600 people there, and he talked about what was called the mountaintop. This is a theme that was not original with King. It was a theme that was talked about by King's predecessor at Dexter Avenue Church, Vernon Johns, giving a very famous sermon, which was called The Transfigured Person or something. The Transfigured, let me just get the name of that, excuse me. The Transfigured Moments. And it was well known. Many people knew it. Been published in 1926. And he talked there. Vernon Johns has a section there where he talks about mountaintop moments. It is good to be the possessor of some mountaintop experience. And he described the transfiguration of Jesus in the presence of Moses and Elijah. These are the kinds of things that Black preachers had gone back and forth on and had shared for decades. So the mountaintop theme that you hear or you know about there is the beginning of the speech, where he talks about standing at the beginning of space and time and talking to the Almighty, and having the Almighty ask him what age would he like to live in. And he's doing this with sanitation workers, garbage men, who had no education in many cases. Why did he decide to do that with those people? The answer is because they deserved to be on the mountaintop. He understood something that is still not understood, including by most people who are listening to me at this moment, that it does not count. Force does not count. Force has a role in intimidating and terrorizing people so that they do not think. Their minds are paralyzed with fear. And as a consequence, they cannot be free. Just like right now in this country, you cannot be free. You are not free. You believe yourselves to be free, but you are in a matrix as deep as the one in the movie. You are paralyzed with fear, unable to act, believing that you are better than the founders, believing that you are better than Abraham Lincoln, believing that you are better than other figures from American history, but completely paralyzed, claiming you can't do anything because you refuse to be on the mountaintop that the garbage men were on. This happens, of course, every King holiday, in which the thing has become now so disrespected that Trump can step in and tell people, you used to be able to get in free that day. Can't do it any longer. I got a different day. You can come in free. My birthday. It's Flag Day. Oh, I got another one too, by the way. I added one for you. Teddy Roosevelt. You want to come to the National Park Service is free? Come on Teddy Roosevelt Day. And that's going to be my conclusion. Teddy Roosevelt, who became president, had an uncle, and his uncle was the head of intelligence for the Confederacy. Roosevelt was a racist, an imperialist, and is honored and revered by Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Bush 41, Bush 43, Biden, and Donald Trump. So go look it up yourself. And this Teddy Roosevelt, who used to have a statue, by the way, and they'll try to put it back if they can, in front of the Museum of Natural History, which had him on a horse and had an Indian on one side and an African on the other. That statue was the clearest expression of the concept of white supremacy that existed in America and was walked by day after day by the cosmopolitan New Yorkers, just like it didn't bother them. Cool. Don't even know about it. Now, I'm proud to say our organization campaigned against this from the early 1980s when we found out about it. I'm also happy to say, although I'm not entirely happy to say, that I unsuccessfully tried to put a sheet on it myself. I was apprehended by the police before that was able to be accomplished. It also was a very large statue, a little bit bigger than I thought it was, and the sheet wasn't going to stay on. So I have a recognition personally that many people pretend that I cannot find the America that they wish, but that America is a purloined nation. In the same way that in the story, the letter was there in full sight, but the mind couldn't comprehend it. Our nation is here in full sight, but the people are too small to embrace it. It is not a nation, as Langston Hughes said, it is an America that has not yet been, but must be. And that was the America that King had a vision of. And the vision of that was practical. He did things to bring that into being. But it's also the case that the concept of the revolution, the real revolution, is one that involves an America that has to be renewed day by day by day by day. So we're in a situation which is a pre-revolutionary situation that was referenced before. The Poe story and the Poe method is a revolutionary method. It's a method of detection. But what you are trying to detect is the terror in your own soul. And then, on the basis of that detection, the removal of that in favor of making a revolution in the consciousness of the people around you. Now, that is what poetry is about. That's what the idea of legislation is about. That's what the method is. And I just want to end by saying this. Lyndon LaRouche, who I was going to quote, but we don't need to do it given time and also given what we're talking about here, has an idea. Maybe we can actually just bring that up just because it will give people a way to think about what to do next. And if you have one of those slides there, Kynan, that I gave you, even the first one is enough. Do you have that? And can you bring that up? I can read it if you don't have it. I think that's it. That's fine. Good. Because this will then bring this together. Okay. The essential problem of mathematical thinking, as we presently know mathematics, is that the geometric notions underlying both geometry and all algebraic constructions are premised either upon Euclidean axiomatic systems. Think about what I said about empty space, for example, or upon non-Euclidean geometries which intrinsically have the same fundamental hereditary flaws as Euclidean systems. They presume abstract space and time in which extension is scalar. Scalar is misspelled there, it should be AR. All varieties of modern formal mathematics are reducible to nothing but such Euclidean and non-Euclidean geometries. And the formal mathematical side of mathematical physics is essentially an effort to discover a formal such axiomatic system which curve fits experimental relationships, quantitatively assessed in terms agreeable to such metaphysical axiomatic systems. This is what Poe is discussing, and especially in the particular passage when he referred to that mathematical equation. I'm not going to actually do the next session except to say that I'd like that people think about this. Does poetry supersede mathematics, including in physics? And if that is the case, what are the implications for what Martin Luther King called his transphysics? He talked about the idea that when you're up in front of water hoses and attack dogs and armed men and women and people are threatening you with death, as in places like Minnesota and pretty much every other city in America today, what is the transphysics that you use at that point? He talks about the transphysics of how to dodge the water hoses and what kind of water can put out the fire of hatred. And for him, this idea of creative, nonviolent, direct action all operated in that zone, in that geometry. So I'm going to stop there, Jose, because I've got to be in the other thing in 10 minutes.
Yeah. No, of course. So, Dennis, thank you. And to everyone else who's wondering what Dennis is referring to, he's going to be live with Diane Sayre in about 10 minutes or so, and people can go on the LaRouche Organization YouTube channel to watch that. I think you've given a lot of people a lot to chew on. That was certainly, I think, a good advertisement, not just for 7 o'clock, but also for what we're doing Monday night at 8 p.m. People should join. As people know, Diane Sayre is running for president of the United States. If you didn't know, congrats, now you know. And she's having a Monday night meeting, and she's doing more on the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. So if you want to join in on that, you can just sign up on our website and we'll get you the information on that. So without a further ado, I want to thank all of you for joining us. And yeah, see you next time.